If you're in the market for a compact SUV for the city with the convenience of an automatic, you're probably looking at the Maruti Suzuki Fronx and the Nissan Magnite. Now they might be different in terms of the form factor, they have a slightly different feature list as well, but today we are going to find out which one comes out on top and which one is the better buy. अगर आप इस वीडियो को हिंदी में देखना चाहते हैं तो नीचे दिए हुए लिंक पर क्लिक कीजिए और सब्सक्राइब कीजिए ऑटोकार इंडिया के यूट्यूब चैनल को। In terms of styling, both the Fronx and Magnite take a slightly different approach. The Fronx, being based on the Baleno hatchback, misses out on the SUV stance, and although the cladding helps give it a tough look, it's far from being an SUV. The Magnite, on the other hand, gets a typical compact SUV look, giving it a larger appearance. In terms of dimensions, there's only a few separating the two. The Fronx is slightly longer and wider and has a longer wheelbase as well, while the Magnite is taller in height. Both cars get LED headlamps and 16-inch wheels as standard, but it is the Magnite that gets keyless entry. The Fronx, which in AMT guise is only available on the Delta and Delta Plus trim and not on the top Alpha, has to make do without keyless entry and go. Now inside the Maruti Suzuki Fronx, the first thing that you notice is of course the dashboard and the design. Just how much is at work here? I mean, it's all plastic, but there's just so much variation. On top you have black basic plastic, then you have a bit of burgundy as well. Sandwiched between them is a brownish golden panel and also a 4-metal silver panel. On the center you also have a bit of carbon fiber trim. Obviously it's not real carbon fiber, but just goes to show how much Maruti has put into breaking away from making it look plain and boring. Now in terms of equipment, because this AMT version is not available on the top spec trim, you get a smaller 7-inch touchscreen unit, still gets wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and it's nice and slick as well, plenty of information in there, so it's not a bad thing. In there is an instrument cluster that's all analog. Now personally, it's not as modern looking or as futuristic as the Magnite's digital one, but it still looks nice. In my personal view, analog is always better, cleaner, nicer. It's always nice to see the needles bouncing around as well. Steering is basic, you've already seen this on other Marutis. Your basic media controls and call settings. What is really nice though are the seats. Really nice and large, accommodating, and the cushioning is nice and soft as well. However, they do miss out on height adjust. That would have been a great feature. And speaking of missing features, you only get a USB Type A port. That's about it. There's no Type C port on offer. And in terms of storage space as well, you only get some space in the center here, 2 cup holders, and that's about it. A center armrest would have been great since this is an automatic, because that would have also allowed for a bit of storage in there. But overall, in terms of quality, all very good. Now jump into the Nissan Magnite, and the first thing you notice is how airy it is. The cabin is nice and wide as well. Compared to the Fronx, you don't feel hemmed in. The dashboard is slightly further away from you as well. It doesn't have as many elements as the Fronx has. Yes, it is all black plastic. It has a bit of detailing in the center of the dashboard as well, but apart from that, it is very simple and clean. You have a slightly larger touchscreen, 8-inch unit on this one. It also gets wireless Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, and you have a lot more in terms of storage space as well. You have some storage in the center down. There is a bit of a tray on the top as well. You get proper bottle holders as opposed to just cup holders on the Fronx, and you also get a center armrest. Now one slight miss is that it could have opened to add a bit more storage, but that's alright. At least it's a bit more comfortable. Speaking of the seats, they are not as comfortable as the Fronx. They are slightly firmer and thinner as well. Those seats are a lot more accommodating, and that just adds to comfort on a long journey. However, the driver's seat does get height adjust to make up for the lost points. The Magnite also gets a 360-degree camera, which is a big plus in tight spaces, and a 6-speaker setup for better audio. Inside you also get a fully digital cluster on the Magnite, which is nice and modern. Personally, I prefer dials like I said, but this does look like it is from 2024. Apart from that, it is all very simple. You get your basic climate control features in the center, AC vents up top, so AC channeling is really nice as well, and the highlight remains its overall sense of space. Now in the back seat is where the Fronx takes, well, a back seat, because space is not the best. The roof is also tapering down, so headroom is a bit of an issue if you're over 6 feet. Legroom is just about enough. Under thigh support, again, not the best. But overall, space is not going to be a problem for the general amount of people. In terms of comfort, seats again nice and comfortable. Even for the middle passenger, you get an individual headrest with a 3-point seat belt. But as we know, the rear seats do not come with load sensors, so you have to basically keep the seat belts buckled up even if there isn't anybody sitting in the back. And to be honest, what is missing are rear AC vents. On a hot day, they really would have made a big difference. In terms of the middle passenger, there is a bit of a footwell, so not as flat as the Magnite. 3 in the back here would be a slight issue. If you want a car that's primarily for the rear seat, and if you want a Ferry 5, then that one is the better choice. Now the back seat is where the Magnite redeems some points because the sheer space on offer is better than the Fronx. Headroom, as you can see, is a lot better because the roof is not really tapering down. So you have a decent amount of headroom. Knee room is not too bad either. These front seats are slightly scooped out to give you that added bit of space. You have some space under the seats for your feet as well. And if you see, the floor is nice and flat, which means 3 abreast will not be an issue either. You also have rear AC vents, which is a big touch and a big plus over the Fronx. And you also get a center armrest as well with 2 cup holders and some space for your phone. However, the center passenger will not have an individual headrest and will only have to do with a lap belt, not a proper 3-point seat belt. So overall, in terms of space, it is quite good. And if you want to carry 5, if backseat is primarily why you're buying this car, then yes, it is the better choice. In terms of safety, the Fronx and Magnite both get dual airbags, but the Magnite gets a TPMS and has been rated 4 stars for adult occupant safety and 3 stars for child occupant safety in the Global NCAP crash test results. The Fronx has not been tested by the Global NCAP yet. Boot capacity in the Fronx stands at 308 litres, which is less compared to 336 litres on the Magnite. However, both these cars are in AMT, guys, which means performance plays a huge role as well. The Maruti Suzuki Fronx is powered by a rather familiar 1.2-litre naturally aspirated petrol engine, and mated to it is a 5-speed AMT gearbox. Now it makes 90 horsepower, which is plenty, and 113 Newton meters of torque, which is also quite enough. And especially when you compare it to the Magnite's figures that are honestly very, very low, this thing looks like it doesn't even belong in the same category. What makes it even more evident is the sheer refinement. It's a 4-cylinder engine, so you don't have that typical 3-cylinder thrummy noise of the Magnite. It's really nice and refined, smooth. And yes, even though AMTs aren't really a byword for smoothness, it still is a well-sorted transmission. You flex on your right foot, and there's a brief hesitance, but it picks up pace quickly, and the gearbox shifts gears quite swiftly as well. Yes, it does take a bit of planning, but that's the case with every AMT. You can't really treat it as a torque converter or a CVT or a DCT. You do have to have a bit of patience with it, but this is still one of the most sought after examples. Where it reflects the most is in the performance time. 0 to 100 is a quick 13.70 seconds, and I say quick because again, this is in relative terms. Compared to the Magnite, this thing is very, very fast. What the AMT gearbox also has is a manual function, which means if you just slot the gear into M, you have a bit more control of the shifts. And again, it's not the best, but yes, it will give you a bit extra control, and that's always welcome. Now, one thing you must bear in mind with this AMT transmission is, of course, that you can't rush it, and that's even more evident when you're doing a 3-point turn. When you have to slot it between drive and reverse, frequently, you can't rush it at all because it just will confuse the system. What you have to do is stop, come to a complete halt, and then shift the gears, and only then it will react well. So again, it needs a bit of planning, and I mean, that's just an AMT trait, but given how AMTs are, this is definitely the better one, especially in city. When you have low speed gear shifts, this thing is a lot smoother, and compared to the Magnite, I mean, it's no competition, to be honest. The performance obviously is quite impressive, but what's also impressive is the ride quality. The Fronx has a really nice supple ride. The suspension is nicely set up for our bad roads, and over a really battered section, you don't really feel a lot. Yes, it does thud over the really big bumps, but these undulations and these small cracks in the road, this thing just irons them out perfectly well. And then you have the handling. Now, nothing to boast about here. It still is a normal everyday city car, but it still turns quite nicely. The steering is nice and light as well, and body control overall is a lot better because of course you don't have those big SUV proportions that you have with the Magnite. It turns really nicely, and overall in the corners it is quite stable. Now into the Nissan Magnite, and the first thing that is immediately evident is the engine noise. Refinement levels are nowhere near the Fronx. It's a 3-cylinder unit, a 1-litre 3-cylinder petrol engine, making only 72 horsepower and 96 Nm. And yes, these numbers do make a big difference, especially when you're on the move. You put your foot down, nothing happens at all. Then the gearbox realizes, yes, downshift, and then it starts moving. It all is extremely leisurely and relaxed. This is not a car you will enjoy once the road opens up. In the city, you might not feel it that much because you're going to be doing crawling speeds, and it's okay for that. But as soon as you get a bit of space to maybe just overtake, it's going to take a lot of planning. And if you just look at the 0 to 100 time, I mean, it's over 20 seconds. That's over 7 seconds more than the Fronx. And it just puts the Magnite into, probably the last decade, because it just is such a low number. And it's not just the outright performance, the 0 to 100 time. It's also the kickdown times from 20 to 80 and 40 to 100. Those, when you mash your foot down, you expect the gears to downshift, and it's just so loud and coarse. It is definitely not a car you will enjoy driving. In the corners, again, there is a bit of body roll, definitely more body roll than the Fronx. So yes, it does wallow about. Steering, yes, it has a bit more heft. The Fronx is quite light in comparison. But honestly, the engine and the gearbox just weighs everything down. I mean, I was talking about the sense of space, which is quite nice. You have a larger touchscreen, you have more speakers, you have a bigger boot as well. It also has those typical SUV proportions and looks. So you will be sort of inclined to buy it saying, you know what, it looks a bit more like an SUV. It has a higher ground clearance as well. The powertrain is just so weak, especially when you compare it to the Fronx, that it absolutely takes away the cake. And on to the topic of ride quality. Well, to be honest, it's not really bad. It's quite nice. Yes, compared to the Fronx, it isn't as absorbent and as supple. It has a bit of a firmness to it. But overall, on our broken roads, it's not going to have a problem. When it comes to price, the Fronx is only available on the Delta and Delta Plus trim, priced between 8.87 lakh rupees and 9.27 lakh rupees. While the Magnite can be had in 5 trims with prices starting as low as 6.59 lakh rupees and going up to 8.96 lakh rupees, undercutting the Fronx. Where the Magnite is high on practicality with a more spacious interior and a few more features like center armrests for the front and the rear and rear AC vents, the Fronx aces it when it comes to performance. That said, you will have to sacrifice a good amount of kit if you choose the Fronx. If it is space, practicality and features that you want, the Magnite spells very good value, especially at this price point. However, if you plan on spending more time in the driver's seat, the Fronx is hands down the better performing AMT.